Again, I'm Paula Glover. I am the president of the Alliance to Save Energy. And we are a nonprofit coalition based in Washington, D.C. That advocates for bipartisan energy efficiency policy that we know will address climate change. It's going to create jobs and economic opportunity, as well as what we're focusing on today, which is reducing our energy costs and energy burden. So I've been looking forward to this conversation because what we know is that universal accessibility to energy efficiency programs and how we reach those families who have the most to gain from the technologies that we have to offer is really at the crux and the core of our industry today. It's a question that we really need to have a clear answer to if we're going to reach our decarbonization goals, if we want to lower energy burdens. We need to be able to figure this out. And if we are going to have a just energy transition, which ensures energy affordability, then the work that we do in efficiency is critical to that success. So before we really dive into what TVA's Home Uplift program, something that I know you're really going to be glad that you hear about, let's just talk a little bit about the challenges that are around for having efficiency programs in low moderate income communities. Next slide, please. So let's start out with the statistic. In the United States, low-income households make up 30% of U.S. residential energy demand, but they only receive 6% of energy efficiency funding. And I just want to talk about why. The first is access to credit, money, and information. That's not a surprise, right? If you think about the efficiency gap, the unfortunate reality is that those who would benefit the most from efficiency measures have the most difficulty in affording these upgrades. And that makes sense if you consider that many LMI households do not have the level of disposable income that would be required to make these kinds of investments. Now, there are other issues as well that we have to consider, right? Poor housing quality, and as well as credit discrimination that also contribute to the program, these kinds of problems in these communities, and makes it also less cost effective and more challenging to run these kinds of programs that we know help families. Another barrier, though, is access to information. Households in underserved communities may be unaware of our efficiency programs, that they even exist. And without access to that information and access not only from the utility company, but from other trusted advisors, they can have a lot of misconceptions about why the utility company would want to help them save money on their bills. And that actually relates to our third challenge, which is the social barriers, right? There is a lack of trust between customers and our utility companies in our underserved communities, but in communities throughout all kinds of jurisdictions. And that can be accentuated by factors like language, literacy, maybe even immigration status. And so when companies are trying to run a successful LMI program, they need to consider those specific makeup, those social barriers of those communities that they are trying to serve. And it may differ city to city, neighbor to neighbor, and quite frankly, even block to block. And finally, I think another barrier is access to contractors that can provide these services. We know that energy efficiency jobs are located in about 99.8% of the counties in the United States. But that does not mean that there isn't a challenge in finding contractors to do this work. And so we have to be focused on workforce development, ensuring that we are not only developing people to work in companies, but also supporting people in communities to start their own businesses and we want them to be focused on energy efficiency so that we can get this work done, because again, what we're looking for is universal access. And finally, I think the last roadblock to these kinds of programs is that we may not be even valuing the full spectrum of benefits as it relates to efficiency. We really do need to think critically about how we incentivize efficiency programs from the customer standpoint, but also how we incentivize those programs as we look at utility programs and what we're trying to accomplish. And that may mean that cost effectiveness may not be the right measure. We have to think creatively if we are trying to spread the access to these programs to a much larger community base than we have today. Next slide. So what kinds of policies should be in place? Well, first of all, for overcoming that foundational barrier, lack of access to credit and capital, policies and programs have to focus on how we're going to bring down those upfront costs. Because while we know that efficiency is an investment that pays off in the long run, For example, spending an extra $100 on an Energy Star washing machine will save more than $100 in energy costs over the lifetime of that appliance. That doesn't help a family who doesn't have the $100 to start with. And so it can limit the usefulness that rebates have, tax incentives have. These may not be the types of incentives that are going to help this customer base. And so having a focus on how we bring down those upfront costs, perhaps instead of offering a rebate, we take that discount off the top when we're selling that appliance, is going to be something we need to think about in terms of our policies. Secondly, though, is that we have to think about how we're going to have better consumer education. You can offer the most incredible efficiency program, but if people don't know about it, it does not do any good. And what we need is clear, a convincing marketing strategy that convinces people about the benefits of efficiency, and explains to them very transparently, right, the potential that efficiency can have for them, so that we can begin to build trust. So it's an open conversation about what the challenges are, what it is that we can do, what we can't do, but also providing people with as much information as we possibly can and using our partners to do that for us. And again, this issue of trust is really closely related to this idea of understanding social barriers within the community and making sure that our programs are targeted and inclusive to that population that we're trying to serve. Step one is obviously doing our homework on specific community issues, such as using focus groups and surveys to understand those demographics and those things that are prioritized in the community. It will allow us to have greater knowledge, but also build relationship that's so incredibly important. And finally, when it comes to making sure that the contractors are actually going to get efficiency work done, again, we have to expand those opportunities for training and workforce development. On a local level, utilities can help by offering resources to contractors on how they can maximize efficiency and incentives available in their area. And by maintaining lists of certified contractors on their website or other information that consumers can readily get. But the issue of having a ready workforce is actually a broader problem, and one that we are throughout the industry are confronted with and need to deal with, and one that's only going to grow as demand accelerates for clean energy technologies. That means we need a national level solution. A specific bill that I will call out is the Green Collar to Blue Collar to Green Collar Jobs Development Act, that's been championed by Congressman Bobby Rush from Illinois. And this would create a nationwide energy jobs training program. Importantly, it would prioritize efforts to train workers from communities that are not historically represented in our industry and our sector, like women, African Americans, making sure that we're spreading opportunity equitably. And so this is one piece of legislation that the Alliance has been advocating for. And finally, I think we need policies that really do shift the dependency on cost effectiveness and using that as an incentive for our utility companies. We've got to figure out how we better value energy efficiency and value it in such a way that we do have much broader access, and not just access, but quite frankly, participation in our efficiency programs.